Of the Egyptian people. That is how leading dissident Mohamed ElBaradei has labelled President Hosni Mubarak's televised address to the public overnight. Speaking exclusively to France 24, he confirmed he intended to take part in any further protests this Saturday. Let's take a listen to what he had to say just a few moments ago.
There is no troop station outside my house. I will, verify that when I go out today. But I really don't know how accurate it is. I think it was, in my view, it's probably a message sent to discourage people to, from sharing in the peaceful, participating in the peaceful demonstration. But I will verify it, and of course people will know if they put me under a house arrest, they have a problem on their hands, because all I'm doing is participating in peaceful demonstrations for calling for the Egyptian people to restore the right for freedom and dignity and catch up with the rest of the world. But we will see today.
And are you planning on taking to the streets today and taking part in these protests?
I will continue to participate in whatever it takes to make sure that the Mubarak regime should leave. I think that there is a consensus here in Egypt, in every part of society, that this is a regime that is dictatorial, that has failed to deliver on economic, social, or political fronts, and that we need a new beginning, an Egypt that is free and that is democratic, and we need to go through a transitional period. Last night, the expectation that he would have decided to leave and then we start a new process, but at the last minute he came out with an empty statement, which was a huge disappointment to the Egyptian people. All what he obviously did not understand, the message coming out from the Egyptian people. It was almost an insult to the intelligence of the Egyptian people to tell them that the only response that I will have a new government. People know full well that he is in charge of every aspect of running the country. He did not elaborate on one single political, economic, or social reform. So I expect today that more demonstration and larger demonstration will go into the street, particularly that the police is out of the street, and it's the army who is taking over, and the army traditionally never really clashes with the Egyptian people. So I hope he will understand the message before things will get ugly. What also is very disappointing to the Egyptian people is the message coming from the U.S., which is trying to saying that we are going to work with the Egyptian people and with the government. Well, you have to make a choice. This is an authoritarian government, and on the other hand, there is a people who have been deprived from their freedom for 58 years. But to assign a democratic reform, as Mr. Obama, whom I have a lot of respect for him, assign the task of implementing democratic and economic reform to a person who is an authoritarian system who has been in power for 30 years is an oxymoron. The first meaningful change in a democratic process is to assign the task to a Democrat. So things does not look good here. People are very frustrated, and I think situation will escalate, in my view.
Leading opposition figure Mohamed ElBaradei speaking exclusively to France 24 there from Cairo in Egypt. The latest we're hearing from the capital is that thousands of protesters have gathered in a central square demanding President Hosni Mubarak quit. Demonstrators have overwhelmed the police in parts of the capital and other cities. The Egyptian army is now guarding government buildings and other key sites. Smoke continues to billow from the ruling NDP party headquarters, which were torched during the tensions. A new government is expected to be formed at a meeting during the next hour. The cabinet was sacked overnight by President Mubarak, who appeared on television, as we've heard, promising the public economic and political reforms. But it wasn't enough to bring calm, and at least 27 people nationwide have now died during the week-long unrest.
It was calm in the Egyptian capital Saturday morning after a tumultuous day Friday, with tanks bearing the scars of a night of violence. The ruling NDP's headquarters, a burnt-out shell. The first small groups of protests took to the streets. They say they have no intention of backing down.
This is my country, and it's the first time I feel that I'm an Egyptian walking on the soil of my motherland. We're all Egyptians. We don't care what happens. We are not moving from here.
After being silent for 4 days of protests, President Hosni Mubarak announced he was willing to make changes.
I have asked the government to resign today. There will be a new government tomorrow with clear instructions to deal with the situation in the coming days. I have never stopped making decisions for the good of the people. I will always defend my country. Its safety and the future of the nation are my responsibility.
The biggest protest yet on Friday brought Mubarak's 30-year rule to the edge of the abyss. An internet and telecommunications blackout was ineffective as protesters poured onto the streets after Friday prayers. Police were unable to control the situation, and clashes left over 24 dead and hundreds injured in cities across the country. A curfew and troops on the street failed to prevent demonstrations continuing throughout the night. The military protected the state TV station and tanks guarded the Museum of Antiquities. They took control of Tahrir Square shortly after midnight. Security forces are braced for another day of protests Saturday.
Shortly after Mubarak's televised address, he received a telephone call from his American counterpart. US President Barack Obama urged the Egyptian government to turn a, quote, moment of volatility into one of promise. He called on the regime to stop interrupting internet and phone access and to deliver on promised social reforms. America has also threatened to reduce military and other aid to one of its most important Middle Eastern allies. Here's what the US president had to say.
What's needed right now are concrete steps that advance the rights of the Egyptian people, a meaningful dialogue between the government and its citizens, and a path of political change that leads to a future of greater freedom and greater opportunity and justice for the Egyptian people.
Other world leaders have also been quick to condemn violence and called on Cairo to respect human rights. Ordinary citizens overseas have been showing their solidarity with the people of Egypt.
From Amman to Beirut to Istanbul, people took to the street to voice their support for Egyptians. Tunisians, too, demonstrated in solidarity with their Arab neighbour. They have been an inspiration to others to revolt against oppressive regimes. World leaders condemned Cairo for using force against protesters and cutting off communications. During the Tunisian crisis, many of them were criticised for their slow response. This time they were quick to react.
I call upon all those involved, especially the Egyptian government and the president, to allow peaceful demonstrations and to give freedom of opinion a chance.
We support the universal human rights of the Egyptian people. We strongly believe that the Egyptian government needs to engage immediately with the Egyptian people in implementing needed economic, political, and social reforms.
The Prime Minister of Zimbabwe suggested African nations might have to prepare for similar protests rippling through the continent.
There is a growing resentment about people staying in power forever and ever and ever. Without giving people the freedoms that they do deserve and demand.
Since people ousted their long-serving president in Tunisia, calls for a regime change have reverberated across the Arab world and beyond. The trend could continue.
The African Union is setting up a heads of state panel to tackle the political deadlock